We're in a model renaissance. There are so many great options. All the cool open weight models dropping like GLM5 and Minimax 2.5, as well as these great models from the leading labs like Opus 4.6 and Codex 5.3. I hope we can all agree that those closed models are the ones that are by far the best. But which one is actually the best? If you're sitting down and using these every day, which model is going to perform the best in your code base on your work every day? I've been putting so much time into all of these models. Even just before filming today, I probably did like 20 runs through Opus, totaling like 3 hours of inference, as well as doing other things with Codex in parallel. I've spent a lot of time with both of these models. Spoiler, I do find Codex to be better overall for code, but it's not that simple at all. I have had plenty of tasks that go either way. Some where Opus does significantly better than Codex, and others where Opus doesn't even know where to start. I'm very lucky to be able to test these models as much as I do and to maintain the subscriptions across all of these services. None of these labs are paying me. I'm not getting any free inference from any of them. The only reason I'm able to afford doing this at all is today's sponsor. If you've paid much attention to the news or my channel, you've probably seen all the crazy hacks going on. This is for 2 reasons. 1, since we're shipping more bugs. And 2, since all of the security people now have these AI tools, they're testing the hell out of everything we build. The amount of traffic my services are getting is way higher, and a lot of that is people who are trying to work around it. Thankfully, today's sponsor is here to keep you safe. ArcJet. These guys get security, and they get it without compromising your development experience. It's actually hilarious how easy it is to use ArcJet. Let's say you're trying to keep bots from registering for your service because you want humans to use your sign-up form instead. Here's how you do that. You install their Next.js components, you add a key to your environment, and then you copy-paste this code snippet. In here, we define an ArcJet instance. It has some rules. Protect sign-up. Email, mode, live. So this will block requests. You can use dry run if you just want to see what it does. Deny disposable emails, invalid emails, and no MX records emails. So things that aren't real email addresses. You can prevent bots the same way. There's even an allow form, so if you want to let Google indexing through, you can, but this is a sign-up form, we don't. And we can set a rate limit on IP address. So you can only register once every 10 minutes on a given IP address. Well, in this case, 5 times in a 10-minute window, so people sharing IPs are fine. But this will keep a bot from registering hundreds of times in a few minutes. And then when you write the code to actually do the thing, you await aj.protect, you pass it the request and the email address, and it will give you a decision. If the decision's denied, you can check the reason, respond accordingly. Otherwise, you just do the thing you want to do. If this is all they did, it would be worth it, but they have so many more useful things. Even just with an email, the amount of validation and verification steps they have is great. They even have a Gravatar checker, which is super convenient. They have a shield you can use at middleware level or at any given route to prevent things like SQL injection attacks, which are not fun to deal with if you haven't had to before. They also have rate limiting, and yeah, sure, everything has rate limiting, but does everything have this level of customization where you can create a token bucket that refills at a specific rate and is pulled from a given ID that you determine yourselves? No, it doesn't. I know, because I had to build all of this for T3Chat, and it was miserable. If I just used ArcJet, it would have been done so much faster and probably more reliably too. If you're having security issues, you need to move to ArcJet, and if you're not, don't wait till you do. Protect your app at soydev.link/ArcJet. Opus 4.6 versus Codex 5.3. I've never done a showdown video like this before, so it's going to be interesting. I've already talked about both of these models independently in relatively high detail, but when I did the Opus part in particular, I'd only used the model for a few hours. I'm now over a week in, and I've been using it heavily, so I have a lot more thoughts. Good, bad, and ugly. Before we go any further, I want to talk about price. Price is a bit weird because very few of us are paying API pricing directly. We're often getting those beautiful subsidized tokens from the $200 a month subs from both Codex and from Anthropic. But it is worth noting because your usage on the platforms will go down faster as a result of this. For reference, Opus 4.6 costs $25 per million tokens out and $5 per million tokens in. But that's if you're using less than 200K tokens of context. The fast mode is 2 to 3 times faster, but 6 times more expensive. These rates are absurd. Just my one test where I did like one small migration that took 5 to 8 minutes cost like $40. It's insane how expensive it is. So if OpenAI has the smarter model, it's got to be way more expensive, right? Well, this is where things start to get complex because Codex 5.3 is not available over the API yet unless you're one of the big companies they partnered with, such as Cursor or GitHub with Copilot. So we can't see the API pricing, but it's relatively safe to assume it's going to be the same price as 5.2 was, which is $1.75 per mil in and $14 per mil out. Roughly half the price. And to be very clear, these numbers aren't super all-encompassing. Like, this isn't what it will actually cost. It's not that this is going to be exactly half the price because of these numbers. Because what really matters is how many tokens are generated. And the number of tokens coming out of the models can vary, especially when you turn on things like extra high mode. If we go to artificial analysis, you'll see that GPT 5.2 is still in second place because they can't validate and verify 5.3 yet because it's not on the API. OpenAI, this is like my biggest issue with you guys. Just do it already, please. So remember, even though Opus is more expensive as a model, 5.2 ended up costing more and also taking way longer to run because it burns way more tokens. So 5.2 Codex took $3,300 roughly of tokens to run the same benchmark that Opus 4.6 did for $2,500. It is also worth noting if you run it in medium instead, sadly there's not a high reference for me to use, you end up at literally a fourth the price at $700, which is way cheaper, but also, again, worse intelligence-wise. Like, you end up being knocked down to 47 points instead of 51, which puts you behind Gemini 3 Pro, or at least right on the same line. Just all things worth considering. But again, this is 5.2. We don't have benchmarks for 5.3 because OpenAI has not let us have the model over API. If you're wondering why, it is currently the public understanding is that 5.3 is good enough, in particular with security stuff. They want to make sure that they're not going to cause a cybersecurity crisis until they have locked down the model doing too much security shit. So that's our understanding of it. I haven't gotten a better answer from anybody. They really should just put it on the fucking API, if I'm being real, because then we can bench it, but we can't. So sadly, we don't necessarily know what the cost of actual use of 5.3 is because you can only use it through the subsidies. But generally speaking, the Codex models are way cheaper per token, but they also reason more. 5.3 seems to be better at being concise, so I would suspect 5.3 will end up being cheaper. But all we can really go by is how quick the usage goes down with our subs. Oh, Fammy. Scam defaultman, boardroom mogging Dario a mope day by just buying OpenClaw. This comes after Dario scared the host, asking Claudebot to kindly change their name to avoid any potential confusion. What consequences this will have for the jester maxing unsafe Mac minis running LLMs with root access across the Bay Area. FaZe, leave this one in. God damn it, Fammy. Anyways, since we don't have the ability to test these things against the API, all we can really go with is our usage in the dashboards. I have been too busy. I have barely touched either of these. Kind of crazy. Here's the $41 I mentioned before, by the way, if you were curious about that. But for my actual day-to-day use of Claude for the last day or two, because I've not really been online, 3% of my weekly usage and 0% of my 4-hour usage window, because I haven't used it since I went live. Then to compare against Codex, which I've been using for lots of shit every day, 92% remaining, and it resets tomorrow. So this is my whole week of usage. I managed to get down 8% of my weekly usage on Codex. Claude Code, which I've used comically less, and resets further along, I'm at almost half that same usage. Let's tell Claude Code to do something annoying. Do a review of this branch against main. Look for any potential issues that we may have. And I will copy this and paste it into the Codex UI, which I have found a significantly more pleasant way to use Codex than the CLI. It is now spinning up parallel agents to review across different areas. And I am running Codex on high. I almost never, ever reach for extra high. I find high to be more than enough. Often medium feels better. Some benchmarks actually show medium outperforming high because it doesn't reason too much about it. One other thing worth noting is that we're currently getting a temporary doubling of our usage on Codex if you're using the app. It might also apply over the CLI, but I'm not sure about that just yet. But hypothetically speaking, we should be getting a lot more usage out of Codex right now than normal. So assuming that is the case, double my usage here, I would actually be at 84%. But when you look here, you see I have been using this a ton. The other was before they marked the desktop app as different because I had early access to it. I have been grinding in Codex pretty much every day other than like the last few because I've been so busy. So this is heavy usage over the last few days, building multiple real applications. And I'm still only at between 8 and 16% depending on how much they honor this doubling over time. Whereas with Claude, which I used for one singular task, I already burned through 3%. And I bet even with what I've run here already, if I refresh, yep, we're already starting to eke into my hourly rate here, and we've bumped up 1% there. Here, I bet if I refresh, nothing. Is it actually possible this UI updates live? I wouldn't know because it's genuinely challenging to make the numbers go down. In the future, I plan to do much more thorough coverage over which of these $200 subs is more worth it. For now, I find both are really hard to max out, especially with that doubling with the app that you can have right now. But again, overall, they both feel really, really fair when you're on that plan. The in-between plans, however, vary a lot. This is going to be another thing I will hold against OpenAI. The $20 plan for OpenAI does not have the fast inference. You end up with much slower models. They're same models, but running slower if you do the $20 plan on Codex. You're going to have a much slower experience, which sucks. The fact that that is hidden behind the $200 tier is rough, and they should be much clearer about this. It's not pleasant. That said, the $20 plan for Claude, I managed to max out with 2 prompts. So checks and balances. One of them will give you the fast inference, but you'll max it out immediately. The other is not as fast as the high tier, but at least you can actually use it. I know a lot of maintainers that are on that $20 a month plan on Codex that are getting away with it. Chances are, if you're worried about maxing out either of these but aren't using them yet, you won't. It is very hard to do. But if you do, you've hopefully built enough to justify the price, because it is difficult to abuse these to the point where you get locked out just by the costs. So price per token, Codex wins. Price per run, it seems like Opus wins, but we don't know for sure because we don't have the API yet for Codex. Price based on the subscriptions, Codex wins. So even just price, the winner varies depending on a lot of different things. So price, I will give to Codex for sub technicality, because we, again, don't have the API pricing yet, nor what it looks like to use over API. Next, we have what I'll refer to as intelligence. This is how capable is the model at solving hard problems. Can it solve problems nothing else can? Can it answer hard questions? Can it do hard work? I could go back and forth about this for a while, but I'll give you the spoiler. Codex wins here. Even Codex 5.2 arguably wins here. There are so many times where I see Opus just tripping over itself and not knowing how to do basic shit that it's incredibly infuriating. But that doesn't mean Codex always wins on hard problems. Here's a site you might have heard of before. T3 Chat. We're working on a lot of things. Launch week happening soon. Keep an eye out for it. One of the things we're working on is integrating T3 Canvas, which is a side project I built for generating images across various models, as well as doing edits to said images. This was a fun thing because I already have T3 Canvas as an existing working web and mobile app. So I decided to try something a little different here. Instead of just telling it what I wanted it to build, I referenced an existing project on my machine. This is the prompt I used. I would like to make a bold change to this app. I want to integrate a complete image generation product as a separate experience while continuing to use the app shell, auth, and billing systems. I have a working version of the product already implemented at user Theo code work T3 Canvas. I want to port the web version here. Write a thorough plan on what this integration would look like. This is a hard thing to do, and I honestly threw this at the models thinking they would not be able. I constantly am pushing, trying to find tasks the models can't do. I thought they'd just kind of fail outright, and I would have to go redo it. I tried having Codex do this. It ported over a really shoddy version of the UI, and it failed whenever I tried to do a generation with no errors. It might have worked if I set up the environment variables correct, but it wouldn't even figure that much out for me. I got no error. I got nothing. The UI just hung. Bad experience. So I went and tried the same thing with Opus using Claude Code, just out of curiosity, expecting it to fail, but hoping that maybe it might be able to unblock itself in some dumb, useful way. And it went way better than expected. This is that version with a handful of additional prompts to bring over some features. But the difference really stood out to me at that point. The way the models unblock themselves and the way the models solve big, hard problems has never felt quite as different as when I did this. When I had Codex try to do this, it ported over every feature. It tried to run the generation commands and it couldn't because the sandbox was preventing it from doing some network stuff. And because of that, it couldn't verify the types it was generating with convex and ended up getting into a bit of a loop from that. Eventually, when it put something up, it looked like shit and I don't think it worked. At the very least, it didn't give me the right errors. It was bad enough that I figured I'll just throw this away. I'm curious what other models do though. Did the same thing with Opus. Opus wrote a plan that included all of the features the original version had. But by the time it had finished implementing the plan, half those features had just vanished. And I actually couldn't get them to come back. I told it, bring these features over, and it built the backend for it, but it forgot to hook up the front end, even though Opus is historically a better model for that. So what's really funny is that when later on I went to Codex and said, hey, I want to implement these additional features that are missing, when it went to do it, it's like, oh shit, this feature's half done. I just need to expose this in the UI. And it did. And that was features like this outputs section here where you can see the other things that were output with this prompt, as well as the conversational view where I can make edits to this image using multiple models. One of my favorite features that we've built into this. If I want to see how these 3 different models will handle an edit, like This photo should be set in space instead. Make them wear silly space suit astronaut helmets. Something silly like this. I picked this one, and then I requested an edit to be made with these specific models. This whole view, as well as the data model for it, didn't make it in the first pass, but Opus did hook up the backend when I asked it to, and then it forgot to do the rest of the work. Man, Nano Pro is really, really good until it doesn't have a good reference for the thing, and then it does some weird shit like this. Like, what even is this? This project's actually a good example of hopping between the models to figure out what the strengths and weaknesses of both are. Generally speaking, the way I would frame it is that Codex does a much better job of not missing the details. It doesn't skip things the same way other models do. If there's an important thing the model should see, know about, and operate against, it almost always does. There's a meme format I've been seeing a lot of, which is roughly, I keep having to bring in Codex to clean up all the Opus slop, and I really do feel that. And this is a good example of that, where Opus got the pieces working, pulled enough together that I could see it work on my computer and start using the thing, but it missed a ton of shit, and it took a lot of work to get it to deal with the things that it missed. I put a lot of effort in and it just kept missing random shit. I can't go back to the compaction, the history thing's entirely broken, but I asked it to handle environment variables because they weren't. At the very least, it showed me the right error in the UI, like environment variable missing. So I copy pasted the error just to see what it would do. And it concluded that everything was fine, that the environment variables were all set up because it was reading the code about the environment variables and not realizing, oh, you need to set them in convex in order for this to work. It just missed the key point that was necessary to make this useful. It just couldn't figure that part out. I've never seen Codex make mistakes like that. Even just like yesterday, I sent out an email to top users of T3 chat because of some changes we were making that I wanted to let them know about early. And I had the funniest set of failures I've ever seen. I would show you guys the history, but there's a bunch of PII in it because it had email addresses, including my own. I had it write a send.js file that would send emails through resend for me, just so I could quickly scriptify and test the sending of the emails. It reads the resend secret key from the env, it loads the template as plain text, and then it hits resend's email endpoint. Wasn't reading the environment variables. I told it needed to. This is how it responded. It made the changes. It made it read the environment variables, but it knows it's using Node. It knows it's just a JS file. It couldn't actually read the environment variables because nothing was set up to give it them. So I told it that it should probably use .env. It did not check about a package JSON. It did not check if it could install it. It did not try to install it. It did not do anything. It just started implementing usage of this package that wasn't there at all. I told it it needs a package JSON, so it ran pnpm init and made it a real code base just so it could work. But I had to hold its hand through all of these things. It was kind of hilarious just how hard it bombed on something as basic as environment variable management, while at the same time doing a 10,000 line of code port, ripping this product over to a different product. That contrast hits harder with Opus than anywhere else, where it can be the worst coding partner I've ever dealt with, doing basic shit like environment variable management, but can also move mountains with giant changes like this. And I think a lot of that comes from how it operates when it feels blocked. To put it simply, it feels like Opus will ignore blockers and trim scope to get around them. Codex will embrace those blockers and fix them directly. This framing has made it much easier for me to know which to reach for various tasks. Codex is so thorough. Just one example I had with Shu. If you're not familiar, one of the many things I'm working on now is a better minimal auth library for adding a sign-in button to your vibe-coded side projects. Very excited to get this out. Should hopefully be soon. In the soon-to-be-released open source repo, I have a lot of different examples to show how to use the library. Things like how to use it in a vanilla project, how to use it with React and Vite, how to use it with Next.js, how to use it with Supabase, how to use it with Convex. And one of the examples was broken. So I asked Opus, can you fix this example? Here's the error. Opus fixed the error by updating the SDK. And the SDK change broke all of the other examples. Not just broke them when you run them and test them, it broke very basic type definitions within them. If it had just run bun run CI or bun run type check or something like that, it would have seen it. Not only did it not do that, it didn't even think to check if the things it was changing were used other places. And this has been my experience with Opus. It is weirdly quick to just get the thing done and often leaves a lot of things behind in the process. People keep asking how I'm using them. I think I made it pretty clear. I'm exclusively using Opus through Claude Code here, and I'm exclusively using Codex 5.3 through the Codex CLI and the Codex desktop app. I'm using these things the way they were meant to be used by the creators of the things. And from my experience, Opus will get you a thing that mostly works faster. Sometimes will get you a thing that mostly works when Codex can't. But Codex won't miss all of the same things Opus will. Codex is a better engineer. It will take more time. The way I've described it is Codex is a measure twice, cut once model. Opus is a fuck measurements, cut 3 times and deal with the consequences model. A lot of people told me I prompted wrong here, but the example with the environment variables was an empty folder that just had a single CSV in it. That is it. But again, these all have their benefits and negatives. Even though Codex does a much better job of unblocking itself and doing things correctly, Opus was able to do a real migration that I couldn't get Codex to do without causing way more errors. Also, I think part of why I went with the Opus build is just it looked better, which is another important thing to talk about. Opus is way better at front-end code. We'll get to that in a sec because I have one more example for this big overhaul thing. One of my favorite test problems is on an old project called Round. Round is also known as ping.gg, the video collaboration tool that we built when I was part of Y Combinator back in winter 22 to make it easier to do live stream collaborations, to bring a guest onto your stream. This was built with the first ever version of the T3 stack before it was even called the T3 stack. And a lot of the libraries that it was built on are now very out of date, absurdly out of date. The APIs are entirely different and don't even maintain the same shape. And this project is really hard to migrate because a lot of those dependencies are super intertwined. For example, if you bump the React version, then TRPC breaks because the TRPC React bindings for the really old version of TRPC have deep assumptions about how React works, and it pulls from deep imports that you're not supposed to touch in React to make it work. This caused most attempts to upgrade the repo to break because it would bump the React version in the next version. It would see the conflicts from the TRPC version, so it would then bump that as well. It would see conflicts from React queries, so it would bump that as well. All of a sudden, it's bumped everything, and none of it can be fixed because everything is broken. This test seemed like a great impossible test because none of the models could do it, and it was just fun to see how they would approach it and when they would fail with something like this. Codex did it. Codex 5.3 was the first model that solved this. I talked about this a bit in the Codex video that I did, but to put it simply, it did a great job of handling blockers. Instead of bumping everything and falling behind, they went a different approach. Codex would bump the first things it wanted to bump, it would see things break, and it would then patch package the things that were broken temporarily. Throughout this run, Codex built multiple patches for multiple packages to unblock the thing it was doing, finished doing the thing it was doing, and then went to bump the next thing and knocked down and removed that patch. It probably added and deleted 6 or 7 patches throughout this migration. And it was awesome. That is one of the coolest ways to solve this problem I've ever seen. If TRPC has this weird expectation about a React internal, why would you bump the version instead of just fixing the React internal thing? And it did it great. I was really impressed. This PR is probably ready to merge. I haven't had the time to sit down and make sure it's good, as well as be around if it does have problems so I can revert. I do expect to merge this in the next few weeks, though, which is crazy because this is a migration for an old repo that I haven't wanted to touch because all of the patterns and packages are so out of date, it's unpleasant. This is the type of migration work nobody wants to do. This is a 12,000 line of code plus minus PR. That sucks. And it just did it. Wild. I still can't believe it was able to do this one. Opus, not close. That said, Codex's diligence can hurt, especially in other harnesses. We don't know in detail how far that goes just yet because most people don't have access to 5.3 over API, but somebody does. Somebody you guys have heard me talk about before here. Cursor does. I got early access to Cursor's new long running feature, meant to allow models to go for way longer. We're talking 24 to 72 hour runs for crazy tasks. I was throwing this at things as absurd as moving Tori's web view off of native web view and into Chrome's embedded framework instead. I was throwing absurd shit at this. I had it building a new window manager for macOS. I've asked my team to give me tasks to throw at this out of curiosity, and one of them was migrating T3 Chat to the new AI SDK, v6 over v5. I had this run with 2 different models. I ran this one with Codex 5.3, and I ran this one with Opus 4.6. The AI SDK 6 migration using Codex went for over 20 hours. It did 85,000 lines of code added and wrote the most absurd amount of tests and some of the most absurdly thorough tests I've ever seen in my life across a ton of different things. I think something went wrong with this one. It seems like it got confused somewhere along the way. One of the compactions failed or something, and it decided its role was to write every test in the world and then some. Of these 85,000 lines, at least 80,000 of them are just tests being added. And this was Codex high grind version on the long-running grind feature. I noticed it was taking way too long, and that it was getting a little absurd, and that this wasn't doing what it was supposed to. So I decided, just for fun, let's try the same thing, but with Opus instead. Opus worked for 8 minutes and 16 seconds and had it done and mostly working. Not bad. This is kind of the problem, though. Codex is so thorough that it will sometimes get lost in the fix everything loop that great engineers get stuck in. I've seen this a ton, where great engineers are just not shipping because they want to fix everything first. And Codex can fall for that trap to the point where you end up with this absurd gap here. I don't see this happening as much using the official Codex CLI, but it definitely does still happen. I've had times where I notice that this is taking longer than it probably should. Something must be wrong. And building that intuition for when a task is taking too long, why the task is taking too long, reading the traces to see where it got stuck, and fixing your code base, your Claude MD, Agents MD, and all of those things to help the model be more successful working in your code base are great skills to build. But it's important to know the difference between these models when you dive in the first place. And I've been caught pretty off guard by the level of thoroughness to the point of self-harm that Codex will do versus Opus just kind of shrugging its shoulders, being like, the code looks fine. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, Codex will try too hard. Opus will put way too much thought into how it can skip trying entirely. As such, I'll often have Opus unblock Codex, because if Codex is trying too hard to work around the blockers or fix the blockers, it might get trapped. If Opus gets around it doing something stupid, Codex can come in and fix it. And I've had a good time switching back and forth between them. Not to shill the company I invested in forever ago, Cursor, more, but this is one of the benefits of platforms like Cursor and OpenCode and other places where you can switch between the models. They have different strengths and weaknesses, and it's really nice to be able to switch accordingly. If I had to pick, like if you put a gun to my head and said you can only use one of these, I'm picking Codex because it's so much better at solving real problems I deal with every day, and I trust it to not leave things behind. Opus is the really, really smart engineer that drank way too much caffeine and just wants to ship. Codex is the kind of disgruntled, beaten up engineer that is scared of an outage and makes everything right just in case. As a result, it's also harder to get Codex to do things that the model might deem unsafe. Like if you want to do something that's slightly insecure, Codex will yell at you a lot and push back. Opus will just gladly go do it. If you want to do something like make a website for generating fake shipping receipts, Codex will not let you. They'll be like, no, this violates so much copyright and trademark, don't you dare. Opus is like, here you go. Want another version? You learn these things as you use them, but there are meaningful differences. There's a lot of stuff that Opus is willing to do that Codex isn't, but there's a lot of hard problems that Codex will consistently solve that Opus can't. I personally can see myself replacing Opus's role in my work more than I can see myself replacing Codex's role in my work, but Codex is the model that solves more problems for me. One more thing that has been just irking me with OpenAI, especially around the Codex 5.3 stuff, is the rerouting that they are doing. I liked it when they did this for 4.0. So like just for context, GPT 4.0 is a dangerous model that's a little too willing to encourage bad emotional attachment type behaviors. So OpenAI started auto-routing queries that were going to 4.0 that were emotional to GPT-5 instead. Initially, they wouldn't tell you this, but they updated the UI to say this was resolved by GPT-5 instead of 4.0 because we detected it was like an emotional thing. They're doing the same thing with 5.3, where if they suspect you're using it for some risky cyber abuse type task, like you're using it to hack people, they'll auto route you to 5.2 because they trust it more, not just because like it has better security built in, more so they trust it to not be able to do the thing that is potentially dangerous because they've vetted it more. The problem is that it doesn't tell you when this happens. It is hard to see if you got routed to 5.2 instead of 5.3, except that they behave differently enough when you actually use them that you'll notice all of a sudden you're not getting information about the tool calls. It just does a wall of 50 tool calls. I'm okay with them doing this, to be clear. I am not okay with them doing this in a way that is not very visible, and certainly not in a way that is account-wide, where if they detect your account is doing these things, they will flag your whole account to be routed to 5.2 instead. Entirely unacceptable. If they exclusively reroute you to 5.2 on specific queries they're worried about, and they show you in the UI that they did that, I think it's totally fine. Doing this in a less transparent way sucks. Thankfully, they've been very upfront about this publicly, and in particular, there was a bug where a meaningful percentage of their users, I think it was like 4 or 9%, I don't remember, a meaningful percentage of users were getting rerouted to 5.2 erroneously. Like they made a bug and a mistake that caused it. It has since been fixed. I don't think many people will hit this at all anymore, but it sucks that it happened and it does burn trust, especially when they don't put it in the UIs that you're using. Meanwhile, Anthropic does not do stuff like this ever. They just ban your account. So it checks and balances everywhere here. I've seen way more people get banned by Anthropic than I've seen people hit with this. These private labs suck here. This is why open weight's so important. But also, we're now at a point where these models can solve real security things and find novel cyber attack mechanisms. Some level of protection is necessary. Yeah. Anthropic would hide the fact that this stuff was happening and just ban people. OpenAI, almost to a fault, will go public with it. This is so much info to just give to users. On one hand, it makes it so they're more toxic, and I've experienced this myself. If you are too transparent, you end up giving a lot of leverage to the people who want to talk shit. But at the same time, the thing they did here sucks. I get it. They need to do better here. There are catches, though. So let's dive into those. First, I'll do front end, specifically design. Opus slaughters here, specifically when you include the front end skill. I already have a dedicated video on which model is best at front end. Definitely check it out. The Opus 4.5 to 4.6 and Codex 5.2 to 5.3 changes did not meaningfully change the results there at all. So don't think it's out of date because it's one model behind. It's not. Everything in that video still stands. So if you're working on front end stuff, I would recommend reaching for Opus with that design skill. I do it all the time. Two flows I'll often do. One is I'll have Codex build the thing and make it work, and then I'll have Opus come in and fix the UI. Another I'll do is I'll have Opus make a mock UI and then Codex come in and implement the whole thing. Next, and this is an interesting one, Swift. Also, I will say AppKit and Swift UI. I don't know what it is, but Codex kind of sucks at Swift. I don't know if it's just not in the training data or if it's just not like a thing it gets or if stuff's changed too fast. Opus is fine at it. I have had times where I had an error and I handed it to Claude Code and it couldn't figure it out. And then I handed it to Codex and it figured it out fine. But man, I don't know what it is, but just Codex is really bad at operating around a Swift code base in general. That isn't the case for a lot of other languages. I have found that Codex is phenomenal at Rust. Opus in general is like much more willing to drop an as any or an unsafe or all those other things. Also note, everyone's experience is a bit different here. For example, Naman, who's an engineer I respect deeply, he's had a different experience with Swift. Apparently for him, Codex is much better at it and Opus is much worse. I will specifically say that my experience here was around project setup and scaffolding, weird debugging, and really, really niche UI characteristics and bugs, in particular with AppKit. For those things, I found that Opus was significantly better than Codex, and Codex kept breaking my build and getting confused. Codex did solve deeper bugs more reliably overall, though, as it tends to. Next, we have what I'll call using my laptop. This isn't computer use. This isn't the model getting the UI and clicking things and putting pixel locations and shit. This is, I want you to edit my zshrc to have this thing in it. Or I want you to go change my git config to do this thing. Or I want you to SSH to this other computer on my network and grab this stuff from it. Or tell me how this feature on my computer works. All of those things. I still love Opus. And honestly, I would keep paying the $200 a month sub just for this part. I use Opus to configure my computers. I use Opus to manage my network. I use Opus to do shit constantly. Codex has improved a lot here, especially with 5.3 because it's so much nicer to interact with. But I find Opus's quickness to unblock itself and work around things is really nice for this. I don't mind when it makes small mistakes when it's editing my zshrc or it misses some small detail because I'll just tell it to fix it. I don't want the thoroughness of Codex when I'm doing these types of things. I often want to do things that might be ill-advised or unsafe, and Codex is more likely to push back on that here too. So when I'm in my terminal, I find myself using Claude Code, but when I'm building in a real code base, I find myself using Codex. That has generally been my flow for the last few weeks, hell, few months at this point. By the way, this particular point about how nice it is to use the model and how nice it is to use your computer is why Pete, who just joined OpenAI, the creator of OpenClaw, aka ClaudeBot, still recommends Anthropic models for ClaudeBot because it's really nice for that case. This one really pissed me off. This is like an actual security flaw that was left in by Opus. This was from when I did the migration, getting the T3 Canvas stuff into T3 chat. It just, for whatever reason, made user ID a nullable field on image generations, which means it's possible for image generations to exist with no user attached. Why? No. We'll never let a user generate an image without a user attached to it. No. Fuck no. That's a huge issue. And I asked it, what the hell? Why is this nullable? No user should be able to generate something without it being tagged to them. And it read some files. You're right. Every generation entry point calls assert non-anonymous, so the user's always authenticated. And then it kept reading, you're absolutely right. It upgraded how right I was. About a bug, a security flaw it introduced. These are the things Codex will never do. I can't say never. It obviously can at some point, but this is really where the difference shines. Opus will make stupid mistakes like this, but it will get you a working thing faster. But the result means you have to clean it up more. Codex is more willing to tell you the thing can't be done or that it will be hard. It's going to put the extra effort into doing everything correctly, but you won't have these cases as a result. And you also might have it get stuck along the way in such a way that it generates 85,000 useless lines of code in the wrong harness, or it just fails to make the thing work. Annoying, genuinely annoying. But that's just how it is. Speaking of which, let's go check in on that security audit I had it doing on Shoe so that we can get it a little closer to launch. Actually, no, this is a review of the T3 Canvas PR. And look at that. It found another pile of bullshit that Opus did. It, instead of giving actual types to the shapes of the data that it's storing, it just did v.any, which lets you store arbitrary shaped blobs on a lot of these things. I did not realize until I asked it to do this audit that it had made things so disgustingly insecure. These are the things that make a working version faster, but also make it an absolute mess to clean up. And funny enough, Codex didn't catch that. Very interesting. I thought it absolutely would have. Can you take a close look at the DB schema and make sure all is good there? Let's see if the extra hint will help it here. Again, the benefits of using multiple models, multiple like AI code review tools, all of that is you might have a great model miss something. Like this is a thing Codex just entirely missed. And it's funny because it's a problem Opus caused, but also Opus is the one that noticed. Editor magic here, sneaking this part in because I asked it about the indexes here and analyzing the schema to see if it catches on to those any's and how bad they are. It caught on to a missing index shape and a generation to turn thing that's non-unique, but it didn't seem to catch on to the any's. I told it, are you not concerned about all of the any's? Valid concern, checking all new Canvas code for v.any and TypeScript any usage. All of these returns v.any usages in Canvas are the type safety gap. Yeah, there we go. Is that where they were? Was it not in the schema? I probably should have read what Claude Code said a bit closer. Yeah, all of the returns v.any. Okay, so it got misled because I told it was in the schema, but it wasn't. I thought this was going to be an example of Codex knowing convex worse. It does not seem to be. It just seems to have missed these or thought it was a reasonable pattern. No, this is awful. Yeah, you don't even need these return statements in convex. It just will infer the returns. They're entirely unnecessary as types are inferred by default. Make sure you run your type checking so that we don't leave any gaps in our type coverage in the final version. You're getting a real-time idea of how I work. Like I know on one hand, it's a little absurd to be hopping between these two $200 a month subs, but this is not far from how I actually do the work, where I'll tell both models to give feedback on the stuff. And some find some things, others find other things. And then I tell the model I prefer or trust more, in this case Codex, to go fix the things that were found across them. Looks like that worked. Cool. You get the idea. And let's just check how the usage went here across these. Remember, I'm measuring this here. We're up to 3% used for my 4-hour session on Claude Code with just that one prompt. Remember, the only thing I've done in Claude Code since sitting down here was that review. And apparently in 4 hours, I can only do things like that. 34 times roughly? 100 divided by 3? You get the idea. To be at 3% already with one task, not great. Meanwhile, I'm still at 100% remaining for my usage for the 5-hour limit on Codex, and my weekly limit has not bumped at all, despite doing the same prompt and doing a pretty heavy follow-up here as well. They're both generous, but I can see a path to hitting the limit in Claude. I cannot see hitting that limit in Codex at all. Like I'm trying, I'm not getting close. Just as a random example of how generous things are on Codex, Bot Cooper from my community has done an absurd number of tokens, like 1.3 billion. The API cost estimates are in the $1,000+ range. They've been using Codex as their subscription in these tools since February 6th. They've done what they estimated would have been over $1,000 of API usage across Opus on API costs. And they've yet to even hit the 60% mark of either the 5-hour or weekly quotas on Codex. That's insane. They are subsidizing so much inference on these platforms right now. Codex is too generous. Claude Code's subscriptions are also very generous, but like if you are actually managing to hit the limits on these, I hope you're doing it with something that can make you money, because doing 1 billion tokens without shipping anything is a little absurd. This scares me as the founder of T3 Check, because I have to pay API prices when we add things. You guys don't as subscribers. It's insane. On February 9th alone, he did 100 million tokens. Insane. And it costs nothing. So it's just part of the plan. Wild. Actually absurd. It is impossible to hit these limits. One more thing that makes me reach for Opus, I'll call it modern tools. Opus is trained on more modern data and seems to have more willingness to use said data. Both still love to reach for like 1 to 2 major versions behind on things like React and Next. Both still struggle with Tailwind v4 versus v3, so much so that I actually asked a question about this to Sam Altman at the OpenAI town hall thing that I was invited to. OpenAI models are not as good about using modern tools as Opus models are. This hurts a lot for things like Svelte, which I know hurts Ben deeply. Codex is just not as good at it as Opus is. Also things like Convex, which you guys all know I love. I often mix up when I'm trying to say Convex and Codex because the names are so similar. Convex is really bad in Codex, which is funny because the names are so similar and Codex is very thorough, but it just doesn't know Convex's patterns as well as Opus does. And I know what y'all are thinking. Can't you fix this with a skill? Can't you prompt better, give it more context? Yeah, kind of. But not having to is so much nicer. And every time you add something to your Agent MD or to your Claude MD that is more steering, that makes it more likely to solve that problem right, but more likely to solve other problems worse. And honestly, as a result, when I'm working on hard convex stuff, I'll reach for Opus initially. There is an exception though. And somebody actually just brought it up in chat. Large code bases. Codex slaughters here. From Tangia Dan in chat, in our massive convex code base, Codex actually does perfectly fine in their observation. Yes, because again, Codex is a measure twice, cut once model. It checks the shit out of your code base to make sure it knows what it's doing before it does it. As a result, if there are good patterns in your code base already, Codex is very likely to follow them and make code that looks like what other engineers wrote. Opus will find the file where the problem is and then fix the problem with no regard for what's going on in the rest of the code base. The Claude MD is almost essential in code bases that are of any meaningful size that are using Claude and Claude Code because the model's not going to put in the extra effort to see what the patterns look like across the code base. You know, the thing we've all done, we're trying to figure out how to solve a problem in a big code base and we go look at other solutions that others have done and then copy paste them. It means that bad solutions get propagated really fast, but it also means good solutions in a high bar can be used to maintain quality. And Codex is going to do the thing I would want any good engineer to do. It's going to hunt around and see how others solve the problem and try to match that specific style and solution. Opus will implement the same thing 3 different ways and not tell you about it. And then you end up in hell. And it will do weird things like just bind any's everywhere in order to get around the fact that it's not being consistent with its own type safety. So even like here where I was talking about both Svelte and Convex being bad with Codex and better with Opus, if the code base is big enough, that problem goes away. I run into this more when I'm starting a new project. Like if I put either in an empty directory, they both have their own weird quirks and behaviors. Opus is quicker to make the changes in that empty directory. Codex is more likely to get confused and not know what to do unless it has good examples or references. But once it has those things, it will absolutely slaughter. A great way of framing this from Naman in chat. Everything I'm saying implies that Opus relies more on its training data than Codex does. Codex tends to explore the patterns in an existing code base, but is worse at making new projects. Yes, absolutely yes. 100% the case. And I've had to adjust my patterns for starting new projects as a result of this. Like a silly example of something I do a lot. I might do a bigger video on how I'm thinking about patterns for stuff like this. Just a silly thing I've been doing, largely inspired by Ben's BTCA work. Models do a lot better with context. Getting them the right context is hard. It's a lot better if you give them what they need to get the right context. BTCA is a great way to let an agent make a request to another agent in the cloud or somewhere else on your computer to get data about another repo. But the way that Better Context does it is it runs a small haiku style model to go do that analysis and get you an answer. It doesn't let the original agent do the exploration. So what I'll often do now is when there's a repo that's a good reference for something I'm working on, I'll go clone the repo somewhere else and then tell the agent about it. I even gave an example of this earlier. Like here. I have a version of this project already implemented at /users Theo code work T3 canvas. This is the context I wanted it to have. I wanted the model to know, by the way, all of the reference you need for this exists here. Use that as a reference point. Another thing I will do is I will start with a fork or a clone of a project that has parts of what I want to get the model going in the right direction. Like when I was trying to do my own window manager, I forked an existing one, trimmed as much out of it as I could, and then said, hey, Opus, or hey, Codex, I want something very different. Treat all of the code here as throwaway. It is meant to be a reference of other working implementations. Use that to figure out how these parts work. We're building something new with it. And this whole vibe is really what I've been liking about Codex. It feels more like I'm engineering to an extent, where I have to point it at specific things and tell it what it needs and how to get it in order to build these things. But with Opus, I get an answer faster and a thing on my screen smoother, but less control of how it does it and more bugs as a result of what it does. And being that we're throwing all of this into the non-determinism machine, none of this will be consistent for everyone. Like, you might have had the exact opposite experience of everything I've said here. I would argue if that inverted experience is consistent, that you might just have fewer hours than me on this. Most of the engineers I talk to who have been using these things for a while mostly agree with the stuff I'm saying here. But man, the ability for Codex to navigate a giant code base and make good, meaningful, small changes is miraculous, especially when you consider how much better it is at communicating than 5.2 was and how steerable it is. That's actually the other thing I wanted to mention, the steerability. Let's say it has a 4-step plan and it's on step 2 of the plan and it's doing something wrong. I'll say, no, do it this way instead. It'll make that one change and then it stops. It just forgets about the plan. And then I'll be like, no, you need to finish the plan. It gets back to it. It compacts. It loses context of what it's doing. And then it stops again. And it's basically impossible to recover. I've had that so many times with Claude Code that it's driving me fucking mad. Honestly, Claude Code is quickly becoming my least favorite harness. It just has so many weird quirks and bugs and inconsistencies. Phase, if we still have the crash out when I was trying to demo this on stream a few days ago, put that here. Opus 4.6 is testing my patience consistently. I wanted to prepare shoe.dev for launch. And one of the things I wanted to do is put a super early work in progress banner up. So I asked it to do exactly that. It did a great job on the docs, minus the fact that it's like covering the top here. Like, it didn't lay out the page properly for it, but it put it there. Cool. The problem is it didn't do it for the home page. It just entirely forgot that there's a home page in this app. What the fuck, Anthropic? One, you forgot the home page. It's in the server package. What the hell? 2, the new banner in the docs is blocking the top of the docs. You need to shift the content out of the way of the banner instead of the banner covering the content. And I'm going to remind it to use its front-end design skill because otherwise it might forget and then the designs will come out like shit. I understand why the whole ClaudeMD thing got standardized by Anthropic. Their models need really, really specific instructions on where to find things as soon as there's more than one folder in your code base, especially the new ones. And they did not fix the docs. It just took so long. Okay. There are so many things with Claude Code that are driving me mad. What just happened there, because you don't know what keys I was pressing, when you paste an image in Claude Code, it takes time. And the images are often big enough that it has to run local compression before uploading it to their server. It doesn't block the input when that happens, and it doesn't show you that anything's happening. So I just submitted a message while it was waiting for the image to attach. It submitted without the image attached because it doesn't block or wait until it's done. We even figured this out with T3 chat in our first month. And then when it was done, it wasn't there. It didn't even show it in the little section on top here. So I repasted it and sent it. And when I sent the follow-up, are you kidding? Literally while I am explaining this, it just failed to compact. I do not get how anyone does serious work in Claude Code. It is not a serious application. What the hell is going on? This model, this harness, this ecosystem feels like it is burning. What the fuck? Compact. I cannot believe you guys just caught me running into this live. This is my day-to-day experience using Claude Code for anything more serious than minor front-end changes. And even here, with minor front-end changes, I ran into the same problem. I was seeing a lot of people memeing about how they use Codex to clean up all the slop that Opus wrote. It was funny. It's not funny anymore. It's too real. It's way too real now. And look at that. Codex did exactly what I wanted it to do. Only competent harness and model right now. I would take GLM5 over half the experiences I've been having with Opus lately. It's the regression's insane. Yeah, it's made me crash out many a time. Claude Code is quickly becoming the worst part of using Claude models. It needs to be fixed. It is inexcusable at this point. Codex is way more minimal and you can do way less with it overall, but at least it fucking works. Yeah. So I run into those types of things a lot with Claude Code and with Opus. But with Codex, I have found that it's much easier to steer. To tell it, no, I want you to do this instead while it is working, and it will take that into account, make the adjustment, and then continue what it was doing. They also have 2 different modes for sending follow-ups, and by default, it queues them, but there's a little button you can hit to send it immediately, to interrupt effectively and say, no, I want you to do this differently, and it just works. Meanwhile, Claude Code is the opposite. If you don't want to send it immediately, you have to manually stash it with Control S. Now I have the thing I had typed there stashed. Some fun facts. Compaction will kill your stash. Pasting an image can sometimes kill your stash. Switching threads will kill your stash. Half the commands, including model switching, will kill your stash. So it's very easy to have something queued via the stash and then lose it. Of the things I put into the stash in Claude Code, I have probably lost 2/3 of them. So I just don't use the feature anymore because I don't trust it. And that's honestly the biggest difference between them. And I really want to emphasize this point, and I don't care if I get flamed. It's the truth. I trust Codex more, but I like Opus more. Codex is the one I would trust with my code base. Codex is the one I would trust with the security of my app, with code reviews, with huge overhauls, with reviewing PRs, with doing my fucking job with me and for me. But Opus is nicer. Opus is more fun. Opus is a pleasant thing to work with. It's very fun to talk to. It will glaze the shit out of you. It will make beautiful looking UIs. It'll make you feel like a god engineer. But Codex will make your code work. And Codex won't cut corners. If you came into this video looking for an answer to which model you should use, I am sorry that I made it much harder. I understand what this video is going to do, and it isn't going to answer your questions. It's probably going to give you more. If you don't know what to pick, I would recommend using Codex. And if you absolutely hate it, you just don't like interacting with it, you find that the way it works is unpleasant, give Opus a shot. It might surprise you. I personally find that Codex is much better at working in big code bases, finding solutions to real problems, and not leaving any stone unturned to make sure the changes are complete. And Opus gets you an answer faster, unblocks itself more aggressively, and it's just overall more pleasant to talk to. There are a lot of other layers here, like you really should be prompting these different models entirely differently. Opus needs to be told what to do. Codex needs to be told what you want. Opus needs to not be interrupted. Codex doesn't care. Opus needs a really good plan done in plan mode with all of the questions answered. Codex, the plan could be treated more as a dynamic thing you build throughout via just a conversation. I found that if I wasn't using plan mode in Opus, everything fell apart. I forget Codex even has a plan mode because I don't feel like I need it. Just like intuitions you build after using them, and it's going to be different for everyone in every code base with every Claude MD or Agents MD in every harness. This is all non-deterministic more than ever. If you thought it was hard to pick between React and Svelte, you're in for a rough time because it's even harder. But there is a big benefit here, and this is the thing I think people miss a lot. Everyone's like, Theo, you're changing tools every week. There's no way you're actually productive. None of this shit's hard to learn and pick up. Switching models is often switching which CLI command I run, or which dropdown I pick in Cursor, or which app I open. There isn't much to learn to swap between them, especially now that things like skills are being shared syntaxes and standards across different things. And as long as you use a tool like skills.sh, it will keep things symlinked across them. Switching models has never been cheaper and easier. It's awesome. You got to play with them all to understand the benefits of them all. And if you're not using either for anything, you're falling behind a bit. These models are insane. The work they can do is unbelievable to me. They have massively increased not just like how much code I am shipping, but the types of problems I am willing to take on and the size of those problems. I've had a phenomenal time with both of them. It really does feel hard to pick wrong, but to be very frank, I have seen Opus do way more stupid shit. But I've seen Codex struggle to get the thing working slightly more because it's trying so hard to get everything right. Opus commits more sins in my code base, but Codex will get a little more tripped up by the existing sins in it. Opus will make my front end beautiful, but not function. Codex will make sure everything works and looks like it was coded in 2008. Opus will waste more water and energy and cost more. Codex will burn significantly more tokens even when it doesn't matter. And very importantly, Codex was built exclusively for coding. We still don't have a standard 5.3. Opus is a general model, which means it's better at things like copy, like answering questions, like being a pleasant partner to work with. And that's why Opus feels nicer and why so many people, myself included, like it more. Yet we all find ourselves doing way more work in Codex. Codex is what I would recommend today. It is probably what I'll recommend tomorrow. We'll see what happens with all the chaos with all these open weight models and what happens when Codex and GPT 5.3 are finally on the APIs. And maybe, just maybe, we'll finally see a Sonnet 5 in the next few weeks, which could very well change everything. But for now, you need to just go play with them. It's hard to know what works for you until you've tried it yourself. So go give it a shot and let me know what you think. Am I insane for thinking Codex is this much better, or have you seen the hype as well, tried it, and realized Codex is good at solving these really hard problems? There are benefits and negatives to all of these models and all of the ways you can use them, but it's important to experiment and figure out what works well for you. This is what's working for me, and I hope this can help you make your own decisions for your own work and projects, and maybe convince your employer that it's worth paying for both of these subs. By the way, if your employer isn't paying for your AI stuff yet and you're writing code every day, convince them or find a new employer. This stuff is too valuable to not take advantage of. Let me know what y'all think. And until next time, keep prompting.